The War on Terror, officially the Global War on Terrorism, GWAT. 5, is a global military campaign initiated by the United States in response to the September 11 attacks in 2001. A global conflict spanning multiple wars. Some researchers and political scientists have argued that it replaced the Cold War. 6-7. The main targets of the campaign were militant Islamist movements such as Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and their allies. Other major targets included the Ba'athist regime in Iraq, which was deposed in an invasion in 2003, and various militant factions that fought during the ensuing insurgency. Following its territorial expansion in 2014, the Islamic State also emerged as a key adversary of the United States. The term war on terror uses war as a metaphor to describe a variety of actions which fall outside the traditional definition of war. U.S. President George W. Bush first used the term war on terrorism on 16 September 2001, 8-9, and then war on terror a few days later in a formal speech to Congress. 10-11 Bush indicated the enemy of the war on terror as a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. 11-12, the initial conflict was aimed at Al-Qaeda, with the main theater in Afghanistan and Pakistan, a region that would later be referred to as AfPak. 13. The term war on terror was immediately criticized by individuals including Richard Myers, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and eventually more nuanced terms came to be used by the Bush administration to define the campaign. 14. While war on terror was never used as a formal designation of U.S. operations. 15. A Global War on Terrorism Service Medal was and is issued by the U.S. Armed Forces. During the 2020s, the war on terror has decreased in volume and intensity following the closure of the wars in Iraq, 2011, with residual operations until 2021, and Afghanistan, complete withdrawal in 2021. This shift represents a transition from large-scale military interventions, with hundreds of thousands of troops, ground invasions, and prolonged occupations, to a more surgical, hybrid, and sustainable approach centered on intelligence, selective strikes, and regional alliances. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. For their part, the U.S. and NATO prioritize cyber defense, online counter-narratives, and cooperation with allies, which reduces media noise and their own casualties. 22-23. On July 31, 2022, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's key successor, was killed in a U.S. drone strike in Kabul, Afghanistan, marking the end of decades of centralized leadership in al-Qaeda. 24. As of 2025, various global operations in the campaign are ongoing, including a U.S. military intervention in Somalia. 25-26. Meanwhile, in 2025, airstrikes continue in Yemen. 27. According to the Costs of War Project, the post-9/11 wars of the campaign have displaced 38 million people, the second largest number of forced displacements of any conflict since 1928, and caused more than 4.5 million deaths, direct and indirect, in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. They also estimate that it has cost the U.S. Treasury over $8 trillion, 29-30-30-14. While support for the war on terror was high among the American public during its initial years, it had become deeply unpopular by the late 2000s. 32-33. Controversy over the war has focused on its morality, casualties, and continuity, with critics questioning government measures that infringed civil liberties and human rights. 34. Critics have notably described the Patriot Act as Orwellian due to its substantial expansion of the federal government's surveillance powers. 35-36. Controversial practices of coalition forces have been condemned, including drone warfare, surveillance, torture, extraordinary rendition, and various war crimes. 37-38-39. The participating governments have been criticized for implementing authoritarian measures, repressing minorities. 40-41. fomenting Islamophobia globally, 42, and causing negative impacts to health and environment. 43, 44, 45 security analysts assert that there is no military solution to the conflict, pointing out that terrorism is not an identifiable enemy, and have emphasized the importance of negotiations and political solutions to resolve the underlying roots of the crises. 46. Etymology. The phrase war on terror was used to refer specifically to the military campaign led by the United States, the United Kingdom, and allied countries against organizations and regimes identified by them as terrorist, and usually excludes other independent counter-terrorist operations and campaigns such as those by Russia and India. The conflict has also been referred to by other names, such as World War III 47, World War IV, assuming the Cold War was World War III, 48, Bush's War on Terror 49, the Long War 50-51, the Forever War 52, the Global War on Terror 53, the War against Al-Qaeda 54, or the War of Terror 55. Use of phrase and its development. The phrase war against terrorism existed in North American popular culture and U.S. political parlance prior to the War on Terror, 56-57, but it was not until the 11 September attacks that it emerged as a globally recognizable phrase and part of everyday lexicon. Tom Brocco, having just witnessed the collapse of one of the towers of the World Trade Center, declared, "Terrorists have declared war on America." 58. On 16 September 2001, at Camp David, U.S. President George W. Bush used the phrase war on terrorism in an ostensibly unscripted comment when answering a journalist's question about the impact of enhanced law enforcement authority given to the U.S. surveillance agencies on American civil liberties. This is a new kind of evil, and we understand, and the American people are beginning to understand. This crusade, this war on terrorism is going to take a while, and the American people must be patient. I'm going to be patient. 8-9. The reference to crusades became subject to heavy criticism due to its controversial connotations in the Muslim world and historical Muslim-Christian relations. 59. On 20 September 2001, during a televised address to a joint session of Congress, George Bush said, "Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated." Both the term and the policies it denotes have been a source of ongoing controversy, as various critics and organizations like Amnesty International have argued that it has been used to justify unilateral preventive war, human rights abuses, and other violations of international law. 60-61. The political theorist Richard Jackson has argued that the war on terrorism is simultaneously a set of actual practices, wars, covert operations, agencies, and institutions, and an accompanying series of assumptions, beliefs, justifications, and narratives. It is an entire language or discourse. 62. Jackson cites, among many examples, a statement by John Ashcroft that the attacks of September 11 drew a bright line of demarcation between the civil and the savage. 63. Administration officials also described terrorists as hateful, treacherous, barbarous, mad, twisted, perverted, without faith, parasitical, inhuman, and most commonly evil. 64. Americans, in contrast, were described as brave, loving, generous, strong, resourceful, heroic, and respectful of human rights. 65. Denouncing the remarks of George W. Bush, Osama bin Laden stated during an interview on 21 October 2001, "The events prove the extent of terrorism that America exercises in the world." Bush stated that the world has to be divided in two, Bush and his supporters, and any country that doesn't get into the global crusade is with the terrorists. What terrorism is clearer than this? Many governments were forced to support this new terrorism. 66. Decline of phrases usage by U.S. government. In April 2007, the British government announced publicly that it was abandoning the use of the phrase war on terror, as they found it to be less than helpful. 67. This was explained later by Lady Eliza Manning Ambuller. In her 2011 Wreath lecture, the former head of MI5 said that the 9/11 attacks were a crime, not an act of war, so I never felt it helpful to refer to a war on terror. 68. Letter from Barack Obama indicating appropriation of congressional funds for overseas contingency operations, global war on terrorism. U.S. President Barack Obama rarely used the term, but in his inaugural address on 20 January 2009, he stated, "Our nation is at war against a far-reaching network of violence and hatred." 69. In March 2009, the Defense Department officially changed the name of operations from Global War on Terror to Overseas Contingency Operation, OCO. 70. In March 2009, the Obama administration requested that Pentagon staff members avoid the use of the term, and instead to use Overseas Contingency Operation. 70. Basic objectives of the Bush administration, War on Terror, such as targeting al-Qaeda and building international counterterrorism alliances, remained in place. 71-72. Abandonment of phrase. In May 2010, the Obama administration published a report outlining its national security strategy. The document dropped the Bush-era phrase global war on terror in reference to Islamic extremism, and stated, "This is not a global war against a tactic terrorism or a religion Islam. We are at war with a specific network, al-Qaeda, and its terrorist affiliates who support efforts to attack the United States, our allies and partners." 73. Usage of the term war on terror was initially discontinued in May 2010, 73, and again in May 2013, 74, on 23 May 2013. U.S. President Barack Obama announced that the war on terrorism was over, 75-73, saying that the U.S. would not wage war against a tactic, but would instead focus on a specific group of terrorist networks, 76-74. Other American military campaigns during the 2010s have also been considered part of the war on terror by individuals and the media. 77. The rise of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria during 2014-2015 led to the global Operation Inherent Resolve and an international campaign to destroy the terrorist organization. This was considered to be another campaign of the war on terror. 77. In December 2012, Jay Johnson, the General Counsel of the Department of Defense, speaking at Oxford University, stated that the war against al-Qaeda would end when the terrorist group had been weakened, so that it was no longer capable of strategic attacks and had been effectively destroyed. At that point, the war would no longer be an armed conflict under international law. 78. And the military fight could be replaced by a law enforcement operation. 79. In May 2013, 2 years after the killing of Osama bin Laden, Barack Obama delivered a speech that employed the term global war on terror put in quotation marks, as officially transcribed by the White House. Now, make no mistake, terrorists still threaten our nation. In Afghanistan, we will complete our transition to Afghan responsibility for that country's security. Beyond Afghanistan, we must define our effort not as a boundless global war on terror, but rather as a series of persistent, targeted efforts to dismantle specific networks of violent extremists that threaten America. In many cases, this will involve partnerships with other countries. Nevertheless, in the same speech, in a bid to emphasize the legality of military actions undertaken by the U.S., noting that Congress had authorized the use of force, he went on to say, "Under domestic law and international law, the United States is at war with al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and their associated forces. We are at war with an organization that right now would kill as many Americans as they could if we did not stop them first. So this is a just war, a war waged proportionally in last resort and in self-defense." 74-80. Nonetheless, the use of the phrase war on terror persists in U.S. politics. In 2017, for example, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence called the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing the opening salvo in a war that we have waged ever since, the global war on terror. Background: precursor to 11 September attacks. See also, Islamic terrorism and list of Islamist terrorist attacks. In May 1996, the group World Islamic Front for Jihad Against Jews and Crusaders, WFJAJC, sponsored by Osama bin Laden and later reformed as Al-Qaeda, 82-83, started forming a large base of operations in Afghanistan, where the Islamist extremist regime of the Taliban had seized power earlier in the year, 84 in August 1996. Bin Laden declared jihad against the United States, 85. In February 1998, Osama bin Laden signed a fatwa as head of Al-Qaeda, declaring war on the West and Israel, 86-87. In May, Al-Qaeda released a video declaring war on the U.S. and the West, 88-89. On 7 August 1998, Al-Qaeda struck the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 224 people, including 12 Americans, 90. In retaliation, U.S. President Bill Clinton launched Operation Infinite Reach, a bombing campaign in Sudan and Afghanistan against targets the U.S. asserted were associated with WFJAJ, 91-92, although others have questioned whether a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan was used as a chemical warfare facility. The plant produced much of the region's anti-malarial drugs 93 and around 50% of Sudan's pharmaceutical needs. 94. The strikes failed to kill any leaders of WFJAJC or the Taliban. 93. Next came the 2000 Millennium Attack plots, which included an attempted bombing of Los Angeles International Airport. On 12 October 2000, the USS Cole bombing occurred near the port of Yemen, and 17 U.S. Navy sailors were killed. 95. 11 September attacks. Main article: September 11 attacks. On the morning of 11 September 2001, 19 men hijacked 4 jet airliners, all of them bound for California. Once the hijackers assumed control of the jet airliners, they told the passengers that they had a bomb on board and would spare the lives of passengers and crew once their demands were met. No passenger and crew actually suspected that they would use the jet airliners as suicide weapons, since it had never happened before in history, and many previous hijacking attempts had been resolved with the passengers and crew escaping unharmed after obeying the hijackers. 96-97. The hijackers, members of Al-Qaeda's Hamburg Cell 98, intentionally crashed 2 jet airliners into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. Both buildings collapsed within 2 hours from fire damage related to the crashes, destroying nearby buildings and damaging others. The hijackers crashed a 3rd jet airliner into the Pentagon in Arlington County, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. The 4th jet airliner crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after some of its passengers and flight crew attempted to retake control of the jet airliners, which the hijackers had redirected toward Washington, D.C., to target the White House or the U.S. Capitol. None of the flights had any survivors. A total of 2,977 victims and the 19 hijackers perished in the attacks. 99-15 of the 19 were citizens of Saudi Arabia, and the others were from the United Arab Emirates, 2, Egypt and Lebanon, 100. On 13 September, for the first time ever, NATO invoked Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which commits each member state to consider an armed attack against one member state to be an armed attack against them all. 101. The invocation of Article 5 led to Operation Eagle Assist and Operation Active Endeavor. On 18 September 2001, President Bush signed the authorization for use of military force against terrorists passed by Congress a few days prior. The authorization is still active to this day and has been used to justify numerous military actions. American objectives. NATO. Trans-Sahara Initiative. Major military operations as of 2011, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen. Other allies involved in major operations. Major terrorist attacks by Al-Qaeda and affiliated groups. As of 2011, 1998 United States Embassy bombings. 2. September 11 attacks. 3. 2002 Bali bombings. 4. 2004 Madrid bombings. 5. 2005 London bombings. 6. 2008 Mumbai attacks. The authorization for use of military force against terrorists, or AUMF, was made law on 14 September 2001 to authorize the use of United States Armed Forces against those responsible for 11 September attacks. It authorized the President to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on 11 September 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons, to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or individuals. Congress declares this is intended to constitute specific statutory authorization within the meaning of Section 5(b) of the War Powers Resolution of 1973. The George W. Bush administration defined the following objectives in the War on Terror. 102. Defeat terrorists such as Osama bin Laden, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and destroy their organizations. Identify, locate, and demolish terrorists along with their organizations. Reject sponsorship, support, and sanctuary to terrorists. End the state sponsorship of terrorism. Establish and maintain an international standard of responsibility concerning combating terrorism. Strengthen and maintain the international effort to combat terrorism. Function with willing and able states. Enable weak states. Persuade reluctant states. Compel unwilling states. Intervene and dismantle material support for terrorists. Abolish terrorist sanctuaries and havens. Reduce the underlying conditions that terrorists seek to exploit. Establish partnerships with the international community to strengthen weak states and prevent re-emergence of terrorism. Win the war of ideals. Protect U.S. citizens and interests at home and abroad. Integrate the national strategy for homeland security. Attain domain awareness. Enhance measures to ensure the integrity, reliability, and availability of critical, physical, and information-based infrastructures at home and abroad. Implement measures to protect U.S. citizens abroad. Ensure an integrated incident management capacity. The 2001 AUMF has authorized the U.S. President to launch military operations across the world without any congressional oversight or transparency. Between 2018 and 2020 alone, U.S. forces initiated what it labeled counterterror activities in 85 countries. Of these, the 2001 AUMF has been used to launch classified military campaigns in at least 22 countries. 103. For the 2001 AUMF has been widely perceived as a bill that grants the President powers to unilaterally wage perpetual worldwide wars. 105. Timeline. For a chronological guide, see Timeline of the War on Terror. Operation Enduring Freedom. Main article, Operation Enduring Freedom. Campaign streamer, awarded to units who have participated in Operation Enduring Freedom. Operation Enduring Freedom is the official name used by the Bush administration for the war in Afghanistan, together with 3 smaller military actions, under the umbrella of the global war on terror. These global operations are intended to seek out and destroy any al-Qaeda fighters or affiliates. Originally, the campaign was named Eternal Justice, but due to widespread controversy and condemnation in the Muslim world, the phrasing was changed to enduring freedom. 59. Afghanistan. Main article, War in Afghanistan 2001-2021. See also, List of military operations in the war in Afghanistan 2001-2021. On 20 September 2001, in the wake of the September 11 attacks, George W. Bush delivered an ultimatum to the Taliban government of Afghanistan, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, to turn over Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda leaders operating in the country or face attack. 11. The Taliban demanded evidence of bin Laden's link to 11 September attacks, and, if such evidence warranted a trial, they offered to handle such a trial in an Islamic court. 106. U.S. Army soldier of the 10th Mountain Division in Nuristan Province, June 2007. An American soldier in Afghanistan's Khost Province. Subsequently, in October 2001, U.S. forces, with UK and coalition allies, invaded Afghanistan to oust the Taliban regime. On 7 October 2001, the official invasion began with British and U.S. forces conducting airstrike campaigns over enemy targets. Shortly after, Bush rejected a Taliban offer to hand over bin Laden on the condition the bombing campaign was halted. 107. And by mid-November, Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan, fell. The remaining al-Qaeda and Taliban remnants fell back to the rugged mountains of eastern Afghanistan, mainly Tora Bora. In December, coalition forces, the U.S. and its allies, fought within that region. It is believed that Osama bin Laden escaped into Pakistan during the battle. 108-109. In March 2002, the U.S. and other NATO and non-NATO forces launched Operation Anaconda with the goal of destroying any remaining al-Qaeda and Taliban forces in the Shaikat Valley and Arma Mountains of Afghanistan. The Taliban suffered heavy casualties and evacuated the region. 110. The Taliban regrouped in western Pakistan and began to unleash an insurgent-style offensive against coalition forces in late 2002. 111. Throughout southern and eastern Afghanistan, firefights broke out between the surging Taliban and coalition forces. Coalition forces responded with a series of military offensives and an increase of troops in Afghanistan. In February 2010, coalition forces launched Operation Moshtarak in southern Afghanistan, along with other military offensives in the hopes that they would destroy the Taliban insurgency once and for all. 112. Peace talks were also underway between Taliban-affiliated fighters and coalition forces. 113. In September 2014, Afghanistan and the United States signed a security agreement, which allowed the United States and NATO forces to remain in Afghanistan until at least 2024. 114. However, on 29 February 2020, the United States and the Taliban signed a conditional peace deal in Doha, which required that U.S. troops withdraw from Afghanistan within 14 months, so long as the Taliban cooperated with the terms of the agreement not to allow any of its members, other individuals or groups, including al-Qaeda, to use the soil of Afghanistan to threaten the security of the United States and its allies. 115-116. The Afghan government was not a party to the deal and rejected its terms regarding release of prisoners. 117. After Joe Biden became president, he moved back the target withdrawal date to 31 August 2021. 118. On 15 August 2021, the Afghan capital Kabul fell to a surprisingly effective Taliban offensive, ending the war in Afghanistan. The U.S. military and NATO troops took control of Kabul's Hamid Karzai International Airport for use in Operation Allies Refuge, and the large-scale evacuation of foreign citizens and certain vulnerable Afghans, executed in cooperation with the Taliban. 119, 120, 120, 122, 123. On 30 August 2021, the United States completed its hasty withdrawal of its military from Afghanistan. The withdrawal was heavily criticized both domestically and abroad for being chaotic and haphazard, 124-125, as well as for lending more momentum to the Taliban offensive, 126. However, many European countries followed suit, including Britain, Germany, Italy, and Poland, 127-128, despite evacuating over 120,000 people. The large-scale evacuation has also been criticized for leaving behind hundreds of American citizens, residents, and family members. 129. International Security Assistance Force. Main article: International Security Assistance Force. U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Richard B. Myers, and joined by military representatives from 29 countries of the Worldwide Coalition on the War Against Terrorism, at the Pentagon, 11 March 2002. Map of countries contributing troops to ISAF as of 5 March 2010. Major contributors over 1,000 troops, in dark green, other contributors in light green, and former contributors in magenta. The NATO-led International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, was created in December 2001 to assist the Afghan Transitional Administration and the first post-Taliban elected government. With a renewed Taliban insurgency, it was announced in 2006 that ISAF would replace the U.S. troops in the province as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. The British 16th Air Assault Brigade, later reinforced by Royal Marines, formed the core of the force in southern Afghanistan, along with troops and helicopters from Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands. The initial force consisted of roughly 3,300 British, 2,000 Canadian, 1,400 from the Netherlands, and 240 from Australia, along with special forces from Denmark and Estonia, and small contingents from other nations. The monthly supply of cargo containers through Pakistani route to ISAF in Afghanistan is over 4,000, costing around $12 billion in Pakistani Philippines. Main article: Operation Enduring Freedom, Philippines. U.S. Special Forces, soldier, and infantrymen of the Philippine Army. In January 2002, the United States Special Operations Command, Pacific, deployed to the Philippines to advise and assist the armed forces of the Philippines in combating Filipino Islamist groups. 135. The operations were mainly focused on removing the Abu Sayyaf group and Jemaah Islamiyah, JI, from their stronghold on the island of Basilan. Citation needed. The second portion of the operation was conducted as a humanitarian program called Operation Smiles. The goal of the program was to provide medical care and services to the region of Basilan as part of a Hearts and Minds program. 136. Joint Special Operations Task Force, Philippines, disbanded in June 2014. 137. Ending a successful 12-year mission. 138. After JSOTFP had disbanded, as late as November 2014, American forces continued to operate in the Philippines under the name PACOM Augmentation Team. Until 24 February 2015, 139-140. On 1 September 2017, U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis designated Operation Pacific Eagle, Philippines, OP, as a contingency operation to support the Philippine government and the military in their efforts to isolate, degrade, and defeat the affiliates of ISIL, collectively referred to as ISIL Philippines or ISIL-P, and other terrorist organizations in the Philippines. 141. By 2018, American operations within the Philippines against terrorist groups involved as many as 300 advisors. 142. Trans-Sahara, Northern Africa. Main article: Operation Juniper Shield. A map of the conflict in northern Mali. Operation Enduring Freedom, Trans-Sahara, OEFTS. Now Operation Juniper Shield is the name of the military operation conducted by the U.S. and partner nations in the Sahara-Sahel region of Africa, consisting of counterterrorism efforts and policing of arms and drug trafficking across Central Africa. The conflict in northern Mali began in January 2012 with radical Islamists affiliated to al-Qaeda advancing into northern Mali. The Malian government had a hard time maintaining full control over their country. The fledgling government requested support from the international community on combating the Islamic militants. In January 2013, France intervened on behalf of the Malian government's request and deployed troops into the region. They launched Operation Serval on 11 January 2013, with the hopes of dislodging the al-Qaeda-affiliated groups from northern Mali. 143. Horn of Africa and the Red Sea. Main article, Operation Enduring Freedom, Horn of Africa. Further information, Ethiopian occupation of Somalia, 2006-2009. Somali Civil War, 2009-present. American military intervention in Somalia, 2007-present, and CIA activities in Somalia. Operation Enduring Freedom, Horn of Africa, is an extension of Operation Enduring Freedom. Unlike other operations contained in Operation Enduring Freedom, OEFHOA does not have a specific organization as a target. OEFHOA instead focuses its efforts to disrupt and detect militant activities in the region, and to work with willing governments to prevent the reemergence of militant cells and activities. 144. In October 2002, the Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa, CJTF, was established in Djibouti at Camp Lemonnier. 145. It contains approximately 2,000 personnel including U.S. military and Special Operations Forces, SOF, and coalition force members. Combined Task Force 150, CTF 150. Task Force 150 consists of ships from a shifting group of nations, including Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Pakistan, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. The primary goal of the coalition forces is to monitor, inspect, board, and stop suspected shipments from entering the Horn of Africa region and affecting the United States Operation Iraqi Freedom. Included in the operation is the training of selected armed forces units of the countries of Djibouti, Kenya, and Ethiopia in counterterrorism and counterinsurgency tactics. Humanitarian efforts conducted by CJTF include rebuilding of schools and medical clinics and providing medical services to those countries whose forces are being trained. The program expands as part of the Trans-Saharan Counterterrorism Initiative, as CJTF personnel also assist in training the armed forces of Chad, Niger, Mauritania, and Mali. However, the war on terror does not include Sudan, where over 400,000 have died in an ongoing civil war.